Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
My guest today is Brian Krogh, a presentation coach. And Brian, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
Brian, before we get started in some tips and ideas you can share with our listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into coaching for presentations and public speaking?
Sure. So I've done a number of things throughout the years, but one of the things that's been consistent for me is being in a position where I am the one standing up and speaking in front of other people. So I've been in sales. I have actually pastored a church in the Boston area for many years. I lectured at Boston University for 6 years, teaching public speaking skills to undergraduate and graduate students. And so there's been a number of different iterations there of my career and what I'm doing. But the one thing that's been consistent is standing up in front of other people and trying to get across an idea. And so honestly, working at the university led to opportunities to start coaching. And I found out that I enjoy just as much being the person behind the scenes, encouraging someone and helping someone, as I do being the person on stage. And so that's how I got into it.
When we met about a year ago, I guess, well, actually a little further than that, because it was just at the start of this whole thing. We got together in person, had a cup of coffee. We talked about the similarities we have because I feel very much the same way. I love to get up and present. I love to train as well, if not more so. I like helping others achieve, whether it's a speaker or someone in business or an attorney, whatever it might be. We gel very much that way. And I'm happy to have you here because of that. I know how much it means to you. Let's dive into that. Why do you think it's still a good idea today to stand up in front of a room and present when there are so many different ways we can communicate with other people?
Yeah, I love that question, Peter. I feel like that's something we don't often think about, especially in the business world. It's a given that, we should just do a presentation. We should present to the client. We should, if we're working on a research team, every week, someone from the research team should be presenting the findings and the data. And we default to that, but I don't know that we ever really sit down and think about why we think this is a better option than putting all the research in an email or putting all the research in slides and just sending those slides some way, saving them on the server or however they would get shared, putting thoughts in a Slack channel. I don't know why we if we ever really take this question seriously. And I think it's an important one. There's so many other ways to communicate and so many other ways to deliver content. It was not that long ago, relatively speaking, in the early 20th century, for example, the city of Los Angeles still had a town crier to get the news. And so
Did they really?
Yeah. So it hasn't been that long that this was the only way to communicate, was to stand up and speak. And now we have so many other ways to do this. Why do we still think this is a good idea? And I'd be curious. I have my answers, Peter. I mean, for you and your clients too. Why? Obviously, you think this is a good idea to stand up and speak. Do you have an answer for this? I'd be curious to know your answer too.
Yeah, my thought, Brian, is that it's still that personal connection. We talk about the pandemic now and being on Zoom or whatever platform it might be, and how much we're missing that personal connection. Yeah, we can see body language, but we can only see a certain amount of body language. And if there's more than two people on the call, the meeting, the squares are so small, we really can't even see that.
Yeah.
And I just think it's that personal connection that'll never go away. It doesn't mean that the others aren't valuable and don't have benefit, but I don't know if you can ever get better than being in front of people or meeting with people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think what I tell my clients is this is as much about connection as it is your content. And this is as much about inspiration as it is information.
I like that.
So the content and the information is so important. I'm not saying dumb down content. I'm not saying get rid of content, but let's recognize the reality. The only reason we think it's a good idea for you to stand at the front of the boardroom or to lead this Zoom meeting is because we want to connect with you and have you connect us to your information, not just download everything you know into our brains. That's overwhelming, and we'll do that on email. And so I think a lot of times when we're presenting, we feel so much pressure because our name is on the slide or because our boss asked us to do it, that we say to ourselves, this is all about me and everything I know. And the reality of the presentation is it's actually not about you and everything you know. It's actually about them and what's most helpful for them to know. So you have to sift through your content and say, how do I connect? How do I inspire? And not just worry about content and information. And so that reality of why we still think this is a good idea, even with all the other ways we have to communicate, I think that's a real important question for us to consider. It changes the way we present, I think.
And don't you think when we're putting the focus on ourselves, that undermines us in many ways? One, we're not looking at the information that they need or want to receive, they being our audience, whether that's one person, 10 people, or 1,000 people. And it's also putting a lot of weight on our own shoulders.
It is.
That I have to perform, as opposed to share information and help others.
Yeah.
And give them the information, again, they want or need to know. I think it's fascinating in that we put the light on the speaker and we put the audience in the dark.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but that's a good way to think of it.
Where it should be the other way around.
It should, absolutely. And in the mind of the speaker, it absolutely should be the other way around. And I think, too, you have to pay attention to when you're sitting in the audience, the world is filled with impressive people. So if you want to compete and try to be the most impressive person in the room, that is a very difficult competition to win. And I think, and that, as you said, the pressure to be impressive is overwhelming. And so much of the anxiety and fear and everything we feel comes out of that pressure we feel to impress everybody, the bosses, the other people we work with. But when we're sitting in the audience, I know when I'm sitting in the audience, and many people I talk to when they're sitting in the audience, they're not looking for the most impressive person in the world, but they are looking for someone who's helpful, who has something that can help solve my challenges, my problems. If I hear about your research and it makes me think, oh, I should be going about my research in a different way, that's what we're looking for. And so when we're in the audience, we find helpful people impressive, not impressive people impressive. But yet we forget that when it's our turn to speak. And so just remembering that, I think it's valuable to say, okay, when I'm in the audience, I'm looking for someone who's helpful. That's impressive to me. So all I have to do is be helpful, not impressive. If I'm helpful and I can help them with the audience, with whatever they're challenged with, they'll think I'm an impressive person, even if I didn't have the best voice inflection, even if I didn't have the best stage presence, and even if I didn't have the best eye contact. If I can help them with something, that will be an impressive thing. And so I agree with you. If we could switch the lighting, that would be a great way to do it.
Yeah, that's what I try to have my clients do. Again, metaphorically, you don't want to be standing in the dark, of course, because people are looking at you. But metaphorically, if you can switch that light, switch where the spotlight goes, it makes a difference.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm writing a book about public speaking. I used to own a publishing company years ago. The working title was, It's Not About You. And then someone who has written 6 New York Times bestseller business-related books, he and I were talking. He said, you cannot write a book titled, It's Not About You. No one wants to read a book where it's saying right on the cover, it's not about you. Because we're buying the book because we think it's about us. So it's still the working title, so I keep that idea in my head, but it'll change before it goes out. When it comes to actually communicating, and we all know that it's real difficult in this fast-paced world we live in. What advice do you have that'll help the listeners be heard, and not only be heard, but have their messages remembered?
This is the big question for me, Peter, because I get, and I know you get this too, it is really difficult to stand up in a world where everyone was talking and no one seems to have time to listen and try to get a message across. And I know you feel that even as a public speaking coach and expert, and I feel that too in my work, to try to get the message out that I can be helpful. If you're struggling with anxiety or you're struggling with clarity when you present, I can help. Getting that message out into the world is a difficult thing. And the same thing, even if you're in a conference room or you're in a Zoom meeting with 5 other people, you know that while you're talking and presenting, their inbox, it just doesn't stop. That inbox is pinging. And there's another meeting coming up right after this one that people's minds are already focused on. It's really difficult to stand up and to speak into that. And I understand that. And so trying to figure out how to be heard and remembered is a huge one. I don't know what I'd be really interested to hear some of what you tell your clients. I don't know that we have time to go into everything here, but I'll give you one thing that I think is helpful to think about. I don't know for you, Peter, what that Netflix show is that you sit down and you say to yourself, or whatever streaming show, you sit down and you say to yourself, I'm going to watch one episode. That's it. I have time for 20 minutes or I have time for 60 minutes or whatever it is. And then that episode ends and the credits start rolling. And in the corner, you see that 5, 4, 3, and you're just like, I'm done. That's it for the afternoon. Like I can't stop myself. Right. Peter, do you have one of those shows that you say it's easy to watch episode after episode?
Yeah, my wife and I just binged The Mandalorian.
The Mandalorian. There you go. That's a good example. Disney Plus. The question is, how do they do that to us? How do the writers get us to the end of an episode and we cannot shut it off? We have to see what happens, right? Well, they create, obviously they create some sort of cliffhanger, some sort of tension that needs to be resolved. And it's not going to be resolved until the next episode. And you think about TV 15 years ago, 20 years ago, a Law and Order episode was always wrapped up in an hour.
Right.
Matlock was always wrapped up in an hour. But they don't do that anymore because they want you to continue to listen. One of the ways to be heard in our world is to bring up a tension that people really feel. And if you can do that, even in a small meeting, if you know your coworkers, you know your bosses, you know your audience, and right at the beginning, you can bring up a problem or a challenge or a tension that people feel, it will be just like that Netflix show. And you say, if you listen to me, we'll resolve this over the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Same thing as that counter's going down. If you'll play the next episode, we'll resolve this tension. And so there's a lot that goes in there, but I think that's a key one. Infomercials do it to us all the time. The infomercial comes on. It says, has this ever happened to you? And there's a leaky gutter. There's a egg sticking to a frying pan. And we say, yes. And they say, we have the solution. And even though we don't want to watch, we keep watching because they told us they have a solution to a problem we face.
We'll watch those, forsaking whatever we were going to do during the commercial time. Get a sandwich, go to the bathroom, whatever it is. We'll sit and get caught up in those and then have to go do what we were going to do when the show comes back on.
That's right. And it can sound gimmicky in a business presentation, but it's the same principle. And it's not gimmicky, it's reality. If you want people to put away the email, if you want them to stop working on that document and tune in to the Zoom meeting, you want them to actually flip on their video and participate, you got to come up with a tension that's worth their time and energy, something that will actually solve something they're dealing with and not just what you're dealing with.
Well, that's back to making it about them.
Right.
I think it's fascinating how you bring that together with what we see on television. Those people are experts at it. Yeah,
they're experts at it. And they're teaching us something. I mean, 2 quotes I go to, there's 2 great communicators that I like to listen to. His name's Andy Stanley. And he said this, he said, tension gains attention. And I love that quote. And he said, if we can't create tension, we should on their side where we are busy with our work and we don't really engage in the meeting or the presentation because it doesn't deal with something that we feel like we face. We know what that's like.
All right.
And so to be on the other side of that and try and come up with that is really important. The other quote that I like is Haddon Robinson, another communicator. He says, if you ask an amateur to speak, they'll say back to you, what do you want me to speak about? If you ask a professional to speak, they'll say, to whom will I be speaking? And I think that just to your point, that's the quote that I try to keep in my head because I make the same mistake. I just get up there and I'm like, I got to tell them everything I know about everything. And that always fails.
It's like, wait, one more thing. You got to know this too before you leave.
Right. It makes a huge difference. And you know, as the presenter, when you get it right, and you know, as you and I probably both know the feeling when you miss it. And it's a huge difference. And it makes the difference. I can have my exact same points. And if I miss the audience and I miss how those points address them and their challenges, one audience will hear it and one audience won't. And it has nothing to do with whether my points are good or bad. It has everything to do with whether or not I could make the connection with that particular group of people.
Do you think the connection is also related to the preparation?
I absolutely do, because one part of our preparation that we skip most often, especially if we're familiar with people, is we skip that diagnosis of the audience. Okay, who are these people? Why are they here? And how can I help them? Those are the three questions I try to ask when I'm trying to bridge. And I encourage my audience to ask, who are these people? Why are they here? And how can I help them? That is so easy to skip when you just jump into PowerPoint. You say, I got to give a presentation, open PowerPoint. Here's everything I know. Here's my research. Here's my slides. Here's my graph. Here's my chart. All right, done. And we skip over that important work of really digging into who the people are that will be sitting in front of us.
Yeah, we just show up and throw up.
That's a good way to say it.
You just vomit right on people. Here's everything I know. I'm going to vomit on you, and I've done a great job.
Right.
I tell my clients, here's what's going to happen at one point. You're going to nail it. I mean, you're not only going to feel good after the presentation, but this isn't going to be, hey, I think I did a great job and no one listening did. This is going to be one of those where you just nailed it. You made the connection. They have the takeaway. They're going to remember that takeaway. And then a month later, you have to give that same presentation to another group of people. And you're going to say, I don't have to prep.
Right.
Because just a few weeks ago, I nailed this. And you're going to come away and say, yeah, I should have prepped again.
Yep. And isn't it true, Peter, if you have an audience in front of you, and perhaps if it's a huge audience, you don't see this impact, but let's say you have 12 people that you constantly present to, or that are going to be in the room. If two of them switch out of the meeting, it can completely change the dynamic. Now you have to go back again and redo all that work we're talking about. It's amazing how little it takes to shift the dynamics of a room or an audience.
What advice can you give our listeners about anchoring ideas so we can go from an audience's short-term memory to their long-term memory?
I think one of the things that we all deal with, Peter, is that our working memory doesn't really work. And our short-term memory doesn't really work. You think about all the messages that come into your brain in a given day. And the marketing guru, Donald Miller over at StoryBrand, he says that we average about 3,000 messages or ideas a day that we get thrown at us. And I don't know about you, that sounds low to me. It sounds low.
I've heard upwards of 7,000 to 10,000, but
yeah,
who knows? It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's the key, is it's a lot. And you think about how many of those you take in and actually remember. It is really difficult to say an idea that anyone's going to remember 30 seconds from now, 2 hours from now, and I mean, forget it, 2 weeks from now. And yet some people can do it. Some people can give us ideas and we don't forget them. And so what are they doing? Why is it that their idea, as it enters our short-term memory, stops and sticks, whereas all these other ones they're just flowing through? And I tell a simple story to illustrate this. My friend has a boat. It's anchored up near Amesbury, Massachusetts. And one day we went to Star Island. It's about a 9-mile journey off the coast, and they have a place there where you can eat lunch. And we left the boat in the harbor and we hopped on the skiff and we took it in there and we ate lunch. 2 hours later, we came back and the boat was magically in the exact same place. And why was that boat in the exact same place? Well, obviously it was anchored into the ocean floor. And more specifically, it was tied to a mooring that was anchored into the ocean floor. And it would have been crazy for us to expect that we could leave the boat in the harbor, go get lunch, come back 2 hours, and that it would be in the same place without an anchor. And the reality is that so many ideas are floating through our brains, are being put into our short-term memory. Most of them are just going to float away.
Right.
And if you want yours to stick, you got to anchor it to something. So what do you anchor to? You anchor to something that's already in a person's long-term memory. And that's what's going to stick the idea there.
Great idea.
Yeah. So, I say the example of a phone number. I know me, I've got to put it right into my phone because I'm not going to retain that. If you told me your phone number, I'm not going to, it's right into my phone. And I'll say, here, I'll just text you so that you have my number, because the idea that we're going to remember these 10 digits and carry them with us so that 10 minutes from now, I can write it down. I think for a lot of us, that's a difficult thing. So if you told me your phone number was 707 194 9597, I would probably never remember it. But if you knew me and you knew that I grew up in Nebraska and you knew that I love Nebraska Cornhusker football, and you didn't even tell me the numbers in your phone number, but you said to me, did you know that my phone number is the exact same years that Nebraska won the national championship? I would say to you, your phone number is 70, 71, 94, 95, 97. And I would never forget it because that's just in my brain, right?
Right. I love this idea.
I would never forget it. And so your phone number, I would remember. All the other phone numbers I forget, that phone number would stick with me forever. I couldn't talk to you for 10 years. And if someone brought up Peter George's name, I'd be like, his phone number is 70, 71, 94, 95, 97, because those are always in my brain. And so obviously that one doesn't work for a lot of people. But if you know your audience and you can think, what is the common experience? What's the thing that we would all have in our minds that I can anchor this idea that I don't want them to forget? I can anchor it to that long-term memory. That's a winner right there. That's how you get it to stick. That's how you get it to stay. And when you get that right, it's a big thing.
Do you think a lot of people are not thinking of anchoring it that way because they're thinking I have to give them something new as opposed to refer to something they already know and attach it to that?
Yeah, I think this is work we often just don't think about. We think I got to give them the 5 conclusions out of my research, or I have to give them this idea, or I have to explain this to them. But we don't often think about how am I going to get them to remember it. I was helping the head of an IT for a big global biotech that's located here in Boston, and he had to explain. He had all these hundreds of scientists that were supposed to be sending him data so that his team could be building a database that everyone in the company could reference. And he said he had to get up at a big global meeting and explain the whole database to everybody. But he kept saying to me, they don't care about the database. They don't care how it works. But right. They keep telling me they just want me to explain how the database works. And I said to him, I said, what's this whole thing like? And he said, my team, we're trying to build a car that helps the whole company move faster. But my problem is they have the car parts. If they'll give me the car parts, I can assemble the car. I'm like, that's your presentation.
Right.
Don't explain anything else. We all get that. We all understand a vehicle. We all understand a car. We all understand a car goes faster. That's your whole presentation. And he presented around that idea with fantastic results. But if he had given the 10 ways this database works and the 10 ways that it'll benefit the company, no one would have listened.
That's the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
You can't digest nuts and bolts.
That's right.
Where he gave them something they can digest.
And I think it can feel to the professional like it's not a professional way to go about things, but we ignore that this is exactly how Steve Jobs went about things. We ignore this is exactly how Ted goes about things. So it's not unprofessional at all. It's actually the next level. Dr. Ken Edwards, another communication teacher, he says it this way. He said, anyone can be complex. Anyone can be complex. It takes a genius to be simple. And that's what we're trying to help. This idea of anchoring, this helps you be simple. It helps you take your complex, crazy idea that no one will remember and put it somewhere where they'll never forget. People are going to see him a month from now, 2 months from now, and they're going to be reminded of that. They're going to say, oh, that's so-and-so. He's the head of IT. They're building the car that's going to get us to go faster. I haven't given him my piece yet. What am I doing? I need to go back and give him my piece.
Yeah, it's got no wheels. I have to give him the wheels.
It's missing the wheels. And I think one thing to recognize there too, Peter, is it doesn't negate the seriousness of the science. So it's not about It's not about becoming simplistic, because I think, many of the researchers, scientists, finance people that I work with, they're worried about losing the data or losing the seriousness of the work that they're doing. But you're not going to lose that. If it's about recognizing, like we said at the beginning, I'm here to connect. I'm here to inspire as much as I am to deliver information.
That's a great point.
Right. I mean, if you got all of your data out there in your presentation, but people walk away confused about what they're supposed to remember or what they're supposed to take home or how it helps them, you might feel good about what you just did, but you missed the whole point of what a presentation is for.
Well, that's when you get the good job and you feel good about yourself.
Right.
Hey, Peter, good job. I'm like, oh, wow. I had 10 people come up to me and say, good job.
Right.
But not one of them said, hey, I took away this, or I didn't know that, and I'm glad I do now. Or here's the part of your presentation that really resonated with me. When you don't hear that, but you constantly hear, hey, good job, that means the listeners had nothing to take away.
That's a good way to look at it. That's a way I hadn't thought about it, but perhaps a good way of registering whether or not you've succeeded is whether or not the audience is talking about you or themselves when you're done. If someone's coming up to me and saying, I'm going to go back and do this differently, or I'm going to change this about my work, or I'm going to take this and I'll never forget it, perhaps I've succeeded. And if people are walking by, to your point, and just saying, that was really interesting, or you did a great job, or you made great eye contact, I've missed something.
Right. I have a couple of clients who speak to high school kids. I always want to know how they've done. I want to know how all my clients have done after they've presented. I know when these two have nailed their purpose, not nailed the presentation necessarily, but the purpose, is when I contact them and they say, this student came up to me and said this, or opened up about that, or I sat with this student in the guidance counselor's office for the next hour discussing this. When they're telling me that, they've connected, as opposed to, hey, I nailed it. Brian, I know you have a resource that the listeners can go to that will help with the fear of public speaking. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So if you go to my website, it's just my name, briankrogh.com. There's a course that you can sign up for there. And it's a 4-part course where I take you through the steps of how you can address your public speaking fears or anxiety, which, as you know, Peter, is a real common thing, something that a lot of people deal with. Such a big part of that is learning to release some of the pressure of being the most impressive person in the room, flipping the lighting, as you said, learning to focus on the audience. Like we said, I love doing this. I love being helpful where I can be helpful. And so this is a gift. It's something just for people to use. If you struggle with fear around public speaking, you get nervous. And let's be honest, Peter, I get nervous. I've done this thousands of times. I get nervous before I stand up and speak in front of people. And so, John Lennon got nervous. Steve Jobs got nervous. Anyone that understands the dynamic of what's about to happen when you speak in front of a group of people that have a million voices talking to them and no time to listen gets nervous. There's anxiety there. And so if you're still learning how to deal with that and how to manage that and leverage that, the resource is available. I hope you'll take advantage of it.
Even if we're not nervous about actually physically getting up in front of people, we're still nervous about, am I going to connect? Is this going to help people? We still have that anxiety.
I would suggest if you don't have any anxiety, you're not very aware of what's happening, to be honest, or you're not caring enough about your audience and what they think. I think anyone that's honest about what's exactly happening gets nervous.
It's universal. Hey, I have a personal question for you.
Sure.
Singer, musician, band. Who's your favorite?
Oh boy. That is a good question. I feel like I've reached a point in my life that I realize now I have 3 young children, and I'm getting to this point where I have no idea who they're talking about when they talk about musicians. And I'm getting to this point that I think everything that was great was popular like a while back. If I have to choose something to listen to, I would choose something like Eric Clapton or Counting Crows or Toad the Wet Sprocket, like those 90s bands. I know that probably is not the greatest answer, but that's an honest answer. That's probably where I'm going. I'm still reliving like being in high school, I guess.
Eric Clapton is my favorite. So when you said that, I'm like, no wonder we get along.
Yeah, no wonder.
Brian, I hope our listeners do go to your site. So it's Brian Krogh, Krogh.
That's it.
So briankrogh.com. They can get the course for speaking anxiety, as well as learn about more that you do and how you can help them. It was a pleasure to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Peter.
Stay well.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.